We're going to get started now, and it is my pleasure to introduce Tommy Aker. Now, before I introduce him, though, I got to make fun of him a little bit. I know, I only have a little bit of time. This is my third year working with Tommy on the Economic Forum. The first one, I'd been hired 1 day ago, and Tommy was a brand new associate dean. And now he's the dean, and I'm the director emeritus. So I've moved along and out of the spotlight. Tommy's front and center. The one thing I will say about Tommy, though, is he's one of the most caring individuals I know. If he can make something happen, he will, and I couldn't be happier having him involved with UCCS. So with that, thank you, Tommy.
You're welcome. And it's Iker. Always a lovely name. He's worked with me 3 years, and he still doesn't know that it's Iker. That's why he's emeritus. All right, before we get started, I get the honor of actually sending nothing but gratitude for the most part. So I do want to thank all of you for attending today. It was a wonderful turnout. A little more than 350 are here today, so thank you for attending. I want to thank Elizabeth Gardner, our panelists, and the UCCS Ent Center for the Arts and their staff for putting on a great show today, and the panelists and speakers for giving us some great information that Bill will continue to speak. I also want to give a special shout out and mention to 2 of our staff people who this is not their normal responsibility, and they took on the task of helping Bill host the Economic Forum, and that is Tamsin and Annie, 2 of our staff members who did a wonderful job putting this entire event together. I also want to thank our volunteers and others who continue to help put on this event, and a special mention to the University Village Pavilion for allowing us to borrow some of their parking spots today. I'm sure you've heard that we have a few things going on campus, on this end of campus today, so parking is at a real premium, which is not abnormal here. Last couple thank yous are to our UCCS Economic Forum partners. Thank you for your continued support and your ongoing support throughout the year. We look forward to working with you in the future. Also, Distillery 291 and Bristol Brewing for supporting us with beverages after the conclusion of our talks here. I did want to highlight 2 things that the College of Business is initiating very, very soon. One actually is launched this fall, and that is a Space and Cyber Enterprise Management Specialization and Certification at the graduate degree level. This program focuses on the business side of space, both from a business components and analysis, as well as keeping our satellites and other things safe from a managerial perspective as well. The second thing that I want to highlight and really add more gratitude to our wonderful partners, Widener and Norwood. Alongside with them, we are launching a property management and real estate program at the undergraduate level this fall. So look forward to seeing that get off the ground. So thank them both for their support. My favorite part of that initiative is it aligns well with the mission of the college as well as the campus, and that we really do want to be our good community partners who really do create a good workforce for us to have. The College of Business graduates around 200 to 300 every single term, and a lot of those individuals do stay in the local economy here or within at least the I-25 Front Range corridor. So when students do come to UCCS, either through Colorado or from out of state, they definitely stay here in this state, which is very important for our workforce development needs. With that, I want to introduce Dr. Bill Craighead. Bill holds a PhD in economics from the University of Virginia. He joined the Economic Forum in 2023 after 18 years experience as a professor, including the United States Air Force Academy and Colorado College. In his first year as forum director, Bill has used his background as a scholar of macroeconomics to significantly upgrade the forum's data and analysis, including the monthly reports we send to our partners. He has also improved the forum's public outreach and communication. You can now follow the Economic Forum on LinkedIn. And lastly, he's worked to strengthen connections between UCCS and the community. Bill's been a wonderful addition to the college, and while Joe thinks I'm the nicest person, I really do think it's Bill. And he does an amazing job of making economics understandable to people like me who don't really understand any of it. So with that, let's welcome Bill Craighead.
Thank you so much, Tommy. All right.
thank you all so much for being here. It's a real privilege to be standing up here as director of a program that has been so well supported by this community for so many years. And it's only possible for us to be here because of a lot of hard work by many people, too many for me to thank individually, but I really appreciate my fantastic colleagues at UCCS who've made this event happen. And thanks to the mayor and the chancellor for their fantastic opening remarks. I was so excited when Elizabeth Garner agreed to speak here because I knew that was going to be awesome, and it was. And thank you to our panelists for contributing their time and insights to this event. The Economic Forum gets its name from this annual event, but we're around all year as a community resource to help people in the region be better informed about economic and business conditions in the Pikes Peak region. Our work is only possible because of the support of our partners and Credit Union, TBK Bank, and the Pikes Peak Workforce Center. Our silver partners, special thanks to Minuteman for printing for us. We engage with our partners throughout the year, including by sending them a monthly economic data dashboard report. Our sustaining partners, one of the things I've enjoyed most about my first year as forum director is the opportunity to get to know some of our partners in person, including at our quarterly partner events. And I'd also really like to thank our media partners. KOAA is here recording and helping us out. The Gazette has been a partner of the Economic Forum for a long time. The Colorado Sun is helping us expand our reach more broadly across Colorado. And it's been a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to write for the new business publication in town, the Southern Colorado Business Forum and Digest. And I think they're putting out a fantastic product. And speaking of fantastic products, Bristol and Distillery 291 are here. And the only thing standing between you and enjoying what they've brought for us is me. So I'll try to keep it quick and light. I want to start out by addressing some of the negativity around the US economy and then focus in on our regional economy and talk about the impact of higher interest rates, the local housing market, some bright spots and some challenges, and then I'll close by zooming out and talking a little bit about the US macroeconomic outlook. And we will post these slides later on our website. It might take us a while, but we'll have them up there for you to check out at some point in the future. So the Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle in 1849 dubbed economics, or political economy as it was then known, the dismal science. And my forebears in economics at the time believed, like economists generally do today, that we get better outcomes when people are free to make their own choices. So the economists of Carlyle's days were opposed to slavery. And Carlyle was a slavery proponent, and that's why he did not like economists. So being criticized by Thomas Carlyle is actually kind of a badge of honor for the economics profession. But the fact that this quip has stuck around for 175 years means that it must resonate in some way. And I think it is the case that we economists have a reputation for being the curmudgeon-y people who, when somebody has an idea, might rain on people's parade by pointing out hidden costs and unintended consequences. So I really didn't expect to find myself as an economist over the last year playing the role of Mr. Sunshine. But that's kind of how I felt as I keep hearing people say that they think the economy's lousy, and I keep having to gently say, well, actually, if you look at the data, it tells a somewhat different story. Not that we don't have some real problems and challenges, we do, and I'll talk about some of them in this presentation, but I was a faculty member teaching macroeconomics in 2008, 2009, and 2010. I know what the data looks like when the economy's terrible, and this isn't it. The commentator Kyla Scanlon has referred to this disconnect between what economists are seeing in the data and what we see in public opinion as the vibe session. And one place that we can see it is in the results of this survey done every year by the Federal Reserve. The gold line here are the percentage of people who say that their own finances are good or okay. And the gray line is the share of people who say the national economy is good or excellent. And the economy is people. So if people are doing okay, then the economy is okay. But then why do people think the economy is terrible? This is something that the economics community has really been wrestling with over the past year. Now, there are 300 people all looking at me, and you're all thinking the same thing. It's inflation, you dummy. And I don't doubt that experience that we had a couple of years ago of high inflation, which is the first time we'd seen that since the early 1980s, has really affected people and really affected how they perceive the economy. But if you look carefully at that gray line, it really dips in 2020, and inflation didn't really take off until 2021. So it's almost as if there might have been something else bad that happened in 2020. The economist Arthur Okun in the 1970s came up with the misery index. And this is just the sum of the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. Those are two very different things. It doesn't make a lot of sense to add them together, except that this gives us a little summary number of the things that most make people feel unhappy about the economy. And that reached its all-time high in the summer of 1980, when the Blues Brothers was the #1 at the box office, and Funky Town was #1 on the radio, which is how we used to listen to music. We're a long way from that today. In fact, while inflation and unemployment have both been high in very recent memory, today, both the inflation rate and the unemployment rate are somewhat below their long-run averages. Now, to me as an economist, looking at the data every time it comes out, inflation's pretty clearly in the rearview mirror when I look at the data. But I know it's still definitely on people's minds. So I did want to say a couple of more things about it to just maybe clarify what's going on. First, just in terms of the definition, when we talk about the inflation rate, we're talking about the rate of change of prices. We're talking about how fast are prices going up, just like your speedometer on your car tells you how fast you're going forward. So when the Fed talks about reducing the inflation rate, they're talking about slowing the rate of change, right? It's just like when you're on I-25 and you look down at your speedometer and you think, oh, I need to slow down. They're trying to reduce the rate of increase. What they're not trying to do is to go into reverse. While it might seem like it would be great if we could reverse those price increases we saw in 2021 and 2022, if the price level was falling, businesses would have to cut their wage bills either by cutting their staffing or cutting their wages. And deflation, falling prices, is actually a symptom of an economic depression. And we saw falling prices in 1931 and 1932, which is something that no policymaker wants to repeat. And the other thing about inflation is that economists define it as a general increase in prices. And that includes the price of labor. That includes wages. And we have seen quite a bit of wage growth in recent years. Now, when people get a raise, they don't think, hooray for inflation. They think, I'm doing awesome at my job. But in fact, those raises are connected to the inflation that we've seen in recent years. And what I'm showing here in the graph, the gold line is the year-on-year change in the consumer price index. That's our main measure of the price of goods and services. And the gray line is the annual change in median wages. And consumer prices initially took off ahead of wages. And where that gold line is above the gray line, consumer prices are going up faster than wages. So each paycheck has less purchasing power than the last. So it's no wonder that people were so dissatisfied. But since the peak in 2022, both inflation and consumer price inflation and wage growth have come down quite a bit, but consumer price inflation has come down by more. And for about the last year and a half, wages have been going up faster than consumer prices, so people's paychecks have been regaining their lost purchasing power. Now, inflation is the Fed's responsibility, and the Fed's tool for dealing with high inflation is higher interest rates. which are not part of the misery index, but maybe they should be. And we've definitely seen an impact of that on our local economy. The economy, the gross domestic product, is how we measure the size of an economy, the total value of goods and services produced. In the Colorado Springs metropolitan statistical area, which is El Paso plus Taylor counties, that I'm going to refer to from here on out as the Pikes Peak region, is about $48 billion. Our regional economy is larger than that of Vermont, and it's larger than some small countries like Jamaica. And when I look at that data, one thing that stood out to me is that construction accounts for a relatively large share of economic activity here compared to the rest of the country. And when I look at employment data, one thing that I see is that we have a relatively large share of real estate agents in our labor force. And I think both of these things make a lot of sense. We're a growing community, and we're a community with a high degree of population turnover. But both of these activities are very sensitive to interest rates. And we can see the effects by looking at mortgage rates. The gray line is the rate on a new average rate on a new 30-year mortgage. And the blue line is the average rate on outstanding mortgages in Colorado. And you see where mortgage rates really took off at the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022. And of course, higher mortgage rates are a huge deterrent to home buyers, but they're also a big deterrent to home sellers when they come after a period of low rates. That gap between the gray line and the blue line illustrates this mortgage rate lock-in effect, where you have a lot of people who have existing mortgages at 3.5% who don't want to sell their houses and move to a new place and take out a new mortgage at 7%. So we had a deterrent to both buyers and to sellers. Now, I'd like everybody in the room who is a real estate agent to close your eyes and cover your ears for about 30 seconds. Because we can see the impact of that on the pace of home sales in the region. So this is showing the gold line, the graph on the left, is showing home sales in the first 8 months of the year this year compared to that same period in recent years. So you can see how much the pace of home sales has dropped. And that matters not only for real estate agents, but also for other economic activity that is associated with purchasing new homes, like retail sales in the furniture, home furnishings, appliances, and electronics category, shown with the blue line. On the construction side, we can see this. So this is our local version of Elizabeth's graph for the state data. We can see the effect in our residential building permits. And like we saw statewide, locally, permitting really fell off after 2005. The gold bars are the single-family permits, and then the gray bars are the multifamily permits, and the unit of measure here is dwelling units. So a 30-unit apartment building would count as 30 in one of the gray parts of the bar. So that period of low permitting is a main reason why we have a shortfall of housing in the region today. But then we saw a pretty healthy surge in 2020 and particularly 2021 and 2022, particularly driven by the multifamily category. But with higher rates in 2023, the pace of permitting fell back down. So far this year, multifamily permits are continuing to decrease, but we have seen a little bit of a rebound in the single-family category. Now, despite those headwinds from construction and real estate, employment in the region, so this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics measure of civilian non-farm payrolls. We've got about 38,000 people in the military to get, which you could add to this to get our total employment. But by this measure, local employment has continued to grow, but it's been growing at a much slower rate. And we definitely see some signs of a softening in the labor market. That's evident in looking at job listings in the region, which are considerably down from a couple of years ago. And when we look at wage growth, average hourly earnings, wages have been pretty flat over the past year. And that comes after a year from the summer of 2022 to the summer of 23, where we had a really sharp increase in average wages. So that was the period that we all remember when you might go out to a restaurant and you'd get there and there'd be a note on the door saying, "Sorry, we're closed, staffing shortage." You know, those days of a really tight, really hot labor market are clearly behind us. Now, to focus in a little bit more on the housing market, housing affordability, I think, is still by far the #1 issue for the economy of the region. It was the main focus of our event last year. And it's still, I think, the #1 negative about the US economy nationwide, because many markets are in a similar situation to us. What I'm showing on the left is the median sale price of a single-family home in the region. And after a sharp appreciation, it's been pretty flat over the last couple of years. And I think this actually represents modest progress on affordability, because we think about affordability as the cost in relation to income, and household incomes typically rise at a rate of about 4% per year. So if house prices were to stay stable for 4 to 5 more years, and incomes continue to rise at their average pace, we'd be back to our 2019 price-to-income ratio. The other graph shows apartment rents, and here we do see the fruits of that surge in multifamily permitting a few years ago, as more supply has caused rents to fall a little bit from their peak in the summer of 2022, although they're still quite a bit higher than they were in 2020. Now, the single-family home market is very seasonal, so what I'm showing in the left are the number of homes listed on the market through the year, where the pink line is 2019, the gray line is 2021, the blue line is 2023, and the gold line is so far this year. So what you can see is that so far this year, the listings on the market right now are quite a bit higher than they were last year. And in that regard, we're actually pretty similar to what we see in national data. Where we're a little bit different is that listings here are also higher than they are in 2019, which was not the case if you look at national data. And on the apartment side, the vacancy rate here is about 2 percentage points higher than its average in 2017 through 2019. So on both the apartment side and the single-family side, there's quite a bit of supply out there right now. Now, a big part of that big appreciation was driven by this shift to remote work that we experienced during the pandemic. One of my favorite measures of this comes from this annual census survey, which asks people how they usually get to work. And the percentage of people who answered that question by saying they worked from home more than tripled between 2019 and 2021. It's since fallen back a little bit, but it's still quite a bit higher than it used to be. And one of the things I really love about this data is that it's available at the metro area level. So we can compare across cities. And when we do that, we see that 3 of the top 10 metro areas for remote work are in Colorado. We're above average, but we're not near the top. What I don't like about this data is that I think the way that the question is worded underestimates the extent of hybrid work arrangements. And I'll use myself as an example. I work in my office 3 days a week, and I work from home 2 days a week. So if I got this survey, first of all, I'd be really psyched to be asked to participate in the Census American Community Survey. But I would answer that question. I usually drive to work, even though I'm working from home 40% of the time. So the other table here shows results from a national survey, which indicates that most people still work at work. A small but significant number of people have fully remote jobs. And then you've got this fairly large category of people like me who have hybrid arrangements. And I think these have really interesting implications for labor and housing markets. Because if you think about somebody with a hybrid arrangement where they have to go to an office location a couple of times a week, but not every day, they're still tethered to that location. They can't just go live wherever the heck they want, but they're probably willing to tolerate a much longer commute if they don't have to do the commute every day of the week. And one place that we saw evidence of this was in studies of major metro markets nationwide that found what they called a donut effect, where the biggest appreciations were on the peripheries, on the outskirts of the metro areas. And where I think this is particularly interesting for us, especially in light of the high degree of work from home in Metro Denver and Boulder, is that I think it may lead to more market integration along the Front Range. I've always thought that people who lived in Colorado Springs and worked in Denver, or vice versa, were a little bit crazy. But if you only have to do the commute a couple of times a week, arrangements like that become a lot more feasible. All right, so I want to hit some bright spots, and the first two of these motivated our choices of panel topics for this event. First, probably the coolest thing that I see in the data that seems to have totally flown under the radar is that nationwide, we've seen a huge surge in entrepreneurship since the pandemic. So during that decade between the financial crisis and the pandemic, the rates of business formation measured by the census new business application data were really depressed, and there was a lot of concern that we were losing our business dynamism. And then in that data, which is what's on the table on the lower left there, we saw a huge surge. And applications, it wasn't only a pandemic phenomenon, they've remained elevated even up to the present day. And we've certainly participated in that in the Pikes Peak region. One way that we can see that is by looking at the number of businesses in the region. The gray line shows the trend that we were on prior to the pandemic, and the gold line shows the actual number of business establishments here. So we have about 10% more businesses than we would have expected based on our pre-pandemic trend. That shift to remote work generated a huge increase in demand for residential real estate, because our residential spaces are now also our workspaces. But the flip side of that was a sharp drop in demand for office spaces. And this has affected office markets and downtowns around the world. Now, the thing on the left you can't read, don't worry about that. All you need to know is that it's a ranking of downtown recoveries based on measurements of activity using cell phone data, and Colorado Springs is up near the top. And the other graph is a measure of office vacancy rates. It's not specific to downtown, it's for the whole metro market. But what it shows is that our office vacancy rate is only a smidge above where it was prior to the pandemic, while you see other markets like Denver, for example, shown with the blue line, that have had huge and persistent increases in office vacancies. So this is something to really celebrate. It's really great for us, but we should keep in mind that those problems elsewhere may still have some impact on us, because all of those vacant offices have mortgages and leases that are assets on balance sheets that will have to get written down, and that may affect the financial system and the availability of credit. Our travel and tourism indicators are looking pretty good. We had another increase in visitation last year. And so far this year, we've seen an increase in revenue collected from the auto rental, lodgers and auto rental tax. Things are going well at the airport. What I'm showing here is the number of people getting on planes during the first 7 months of the year, this year compared to past years. So you can see that not only are more people coming to Colorado Springs, but the airport has done really well in attracting new air service and getting the people who live here to use our airport. Yeah. I'm going to get a ticket to BWI soon, so I'm psyched about that. Another Another place where we see some positive local impact is in the national revival of what economists call industrial policy. And these are government policies intended to encourage the development of particular industries. And there are two main pieces of legislation here. The CHIPS Act, which is supporting the development of our semiconductor industry, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes a number of things, but a big part of that was support for development of domestic clean energy and electric vehicle manufacturing. And nationally, we can see this in a surge in construction spending for manufacturing. So this is spending on building new factories, and that's mainly driven by the computer, electronic, electrical category. Locally, the people who work on economic development in the region and in the state have done a really fantastic job of taking advantage of the opportunities created by this legislation. We have 2 CHIPS Act projects right here in Colorado Springs, and then regionally, the Elevate Quantum Tech Hub broke ground on a campus in Arvada, and I think that is likely to have some spillover effect on us. And the CS Wind facility expansion in Pueblo is being supported by the Inflation Reduction Act. All right, so I have some challenges. I can't be all sunshine all the time. So these are things that maybe are a little bit negative, but I think they are both things that we can have a good opportunity to improve on. So one is education. I look at a lot of, and this is really statewide, I look at a lot of state-level data, and usually Colorado's near the top. We're one of the highest states for household income that's not on the east or west coast, and part of that's because we have a highly educated population. The share of our population that has a bachelor's degree or higher is second only to Massachusetts among states. District of Columbia is also higher. Regional figures a little bit lower than the statewide figure, but it's still quite a bit higher than the national figure. But our high school graduation rate is 40th. And what this suggests to me, I know our schools, our educators, our school districts are doing a lot of fantastic work, but what this suggests to me is that we are not doing as well as we could in preparing a high percentage of the kids who grow up here to fully take advantage of the opportunities that the Colorado economy is creating. And we are relying on importing educated workers from other states, something that we've done with great success. Now, education is an important life decision, and I want to tell you as an economist, the most important thing in many life decisions is not money, but the data do say that there are some pretty significant financial implications for educational attainment, right? If we look at the difference between the median earnings of somebody whose highest level of education is a bachelor's degree compared to somebody who stopped with a high school diploma, the difference is 70%. It's a little bit lower in our local labor market. We have a little bit less income inequality here, but it's still pretty significant. Another challenge for us is childcare, or what people in the field prefer to refer to as early childhood education. One proxy for the availability of early childhood education is the number of people working in early childhood workforce categories relative to the number of young children. And we are quite a bit lower than the rest of the state and the rest of the country. And we see the impact of that in the labor force participation rate of parents. So what this is showing is the share of families with young children where all of the parents in the family are participating in the labor force. And we are quite a bit lower than the rest of the state and the rest of the country. Now, a successful economy is one that's creating good choices for people. So to the extent that this reflects a difference in preferences, it's not really an economic problem. But to the extent that it reflects a constraint where lack of availability is holding people back from opportunities, it is an economic issue and one that we could potentially address in a way that would allow us to get more out of the talents of the people who are already here. Now, I want to close up with the US macroeconomic outlook. The most important thing for the US economy are consumers. And what I'm showing here is inflation-adjusted disposable income. So disposable just means after taxes and government transfers. And you see the huge spikes during the pandemic when those economic impact payments, as they were officially known, were direct deposited into people's bank accounts. But after that second payment in March of 2021, real disposable incomes are trending down. That's the period when the real value of people's earnings is most heavily being eroded by inflation. But there's a turning point in the middle of 2022, and since then, real incomes have been trending up, which has allowed consumers to continue to increase their spending. But people came out of the pandemic with a lot of extra savings. By most measures, that's gone, and the saving rate is pretty low by historical standards. So it wouldn't be surprising to see consumers pull back a little bit on their spending. Although we are talking about American consumers. My favorite measure of employment of the labor market is the share of people who are age 25 to 54 who are employed. And that is currently tied with a figure we hit last summer at its highest level since 2001. So by that measure, the labor market looks good. You may have heard about the unemployment rate rising over the past year, but to be counted as unemployed, you have to be looking for a job. So the main reason the unemployment rate is higher today than it was is that there are more people looking for jobs. It's not because there's been a decline in the number of people who are working. That said, some other data on the labor market show a distinct cooling of the labor market. And we can see that with the national job openings rate, which is the blue line, and the national hiring rate, which is the gray line. Now, to some degree, this was desired because inflation is essentially a symptom of an economy that's too hot. So the Fed wanted things to cool down. But the worry is that we might go from too hot, cruise right by just right, and end up too cold. And this is particularly a concern because the full effect of monetary policy changes is only felt with a considerable time lag. So the Fed always has to be looking 6 to 12 to 18 months ahead. I definitely think they did the right thing last week. I wish they had done that somewhat sooner. And to return that to our theme of interest rates, the interest rate that the Fed targets is a short-term rate, the federal funds rate. The interest rates that most affect our daily lives are long-term rates, like the 30-year mortgage rate. And long-term rates depend in part on the expectations about what's going to happen to short-term rates. And we can see in the first part of this graph, the mortgage rate starts to rise even before the federal funds rate increased, because financial markets anticipated that the federal funds rate was going to go up. And today, we've only just seen the beginning of what is anticipated to be a cycle of rate cuts by the Fed. But mortgage rates have already moved quite a bit in anticipation of that cycle. So the effects of the rate cuts that we are expecting from the Fed are already here in mortgage rates. They're already priced in. And I do want to caution people a little bit that that decade between the pandemic and the financial crisis was very unusual in financial markets, because that was the time when, for much of it, the federal funds rate was pinned at zero, and the Fed was doing policies like quantitative easing to try to more directly bring long-term rates down. And that's where we got those 4% mortgage rates. We shouldn't expect that to return. Fannie Mae's forecast for next year, the end of next year, is for mortgages to be at 5.7%. I'm personally not a forecaster, but that's what they're anticipating. So a lot of this effect of the Fed's easing is already here. We'll see over the weeks and months to come whether that leads to a rebound in home sales and construction. And with that, I think Maggie is here to let me take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Craighead. Thank you all for being here as we get to the end of this forum. I do have a few questions for you. Let's start with the vibe session. I like that term, by the way. What do you tell people who are presented figures that show inflation is slowing and that employment is doing pretty good, but they just still feel like the economy is bad. How do we change that outlook?
You know, to be honest, I've been struggling with it. I mean, it has been a genuine challenge for me as an economist because I see things that are a lot more positive in the data than what I hear when I go out. You know, if I go to a coffee shop and I'm making conversation with the barista and I say, oh, it's kind of slow today. And they'll be like, yeah, the economy stinks. And, you know, I don't, I usually let that slide. You know, I think that, you know, I think that high inflation that we went through, you know, like I said, to me in the data, it's clearly in the past, but I think it really had a scarring impact on people, not just because they lost purchasing power during that period that I showed, but also psychologically. You know, the last time we had high inflation was the early 80s, so people hadn't really experienced it. So I think part of it is just healing with time.
Thank you. For moving on to the housing market here, current mortgage rates around 6%. Is that the new normal?
I think roughly speaking that is. I'm not a forecaster, but when I look at kind of, that was a fairly typical mortgage rate in the years prior to the 2008 financial crisis, right? So I said that that period from 2008 to 2019 was pretty unusual. And, you know, my concern is that we have a generation of, or half a generation of people who kind of grew up thinking of that as normal, and it really isn't. But 6% was, I think, a fairly typical number to see in that decade leading up to the financial crisis. So like I said, I think we are probably most of the way there on what we're going to see for declines in mortgage rates. They will definitely move around. Like you look at any period, there are ups and downs. So I'm not saying they won't go lower, but you know, if you look back 20 years from now on, you know, what was the average during this period, that doesn't sound like a crazy rough estimate to me.
Gotcha. All right, we have about 1 minute left here. Last question for you, Dr. Craighead. You mentioned Colorado's high school graduation rate is below the national average. What policies or what ways can we, what policies do you think would be beneficial to get that up and to better educate kids that are born here in Colorado?
Well, the first thing I would say is I would refer people to our outstanding education school here at UCCS that has the real expertise on this topic. I guess, to be honest, and I was born in Colorado. My family moved away, and when I looked at the education data, I told my mother, I'm so glad we moved to Michigan, which is kind of an awful thing to say. But when I look at Colorado, I see a really successful economy. We're a really prosperous state in a lot of ways. And I do wonder, when I look at some of these other things that are a little less encouraging, I do wonder if there's a little bit of complacency here, right? That we are a prosperous, high-income, growing state. You know, when you tell people you're from Colorado, everybody's like, oh yeah, I love Colorado, right? So I do wonder if we just have a little bit of complacency. And, you know, one of my thoughts here, and including this in this presentation, was just to create a little bit more sense of urgency, to get people thinking about what can we do.
Gotcha. All right, wrapping up right on time for happy hour. I'll let you do the closing here.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. We are up on LinkedIn. If you haven't yet already, we did make a report this year that you can grab a copy of, and enjoy what Bristol and Distillery 291 have brought for us. Thank you all so much.